Good. It is 11 o'clock Eastern U.S. time. So everybody knows, we have a, uh, a real neat group today, folks from all over the world, people who work for various trade organizations, international economic development, some companies. There's really a diverse group that is interested in this topic. And so I'm your host. My name is Bill Kenny, and our topic today is navigating the challenges of the vast American market, the impact of a vast geographic region. And so the format that we go in here is pretty straightforward. Lance and I will chat for a bit. We'll make sure that we cover this topic kind of at least at a high level, and then we'll get into your questions, and many of you submitted questions, which we'll get to, and then we'll certainly go to additional questions that anyone wants to add in. So feel free to, as we're going here, add additional questions or wait till we get to sort of the Q&A part, whatever is most comfortable for you. So in any event, it is a pleasure to be with you again. My name is Bill Kenny. I am from a company called Meet, and we help international companies exhibit at U.S. trade shows and take advantage of in-person marketing. And we work all with B2B type companies. And today we have the distinct pleasure to be joined by with Lance Scott from Alliance Americas. Welcome, Lance.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for everybody for tuning in and listening in.
Excellent. And I'm just double checking that we're recording because this is a fairly new platform for us. The last webinar we did, I forgot to hit record. So thankfully, I think I've set it to automatically happen. So we should be good to go. So Lance, you are doing exciting work. You've been in the world of soft landing and internationalization for many years, and you've got some great experience. Can you tell us first a little bit about your background, and then we'll talk a little bit about Alliance Americas, just so we have some context for the comments you'll make?
Sure. I started my career as an electrical engineer, digital design engineer, and worked for some big companies, pretty much through school and out of school, IBM, United Technologies, Danaher, and had a couple of very good years with Danaher, learning their business platform. But then quickly, maybe through good fortune, found a Swedish entrepreneur who was representing 3 Swiss companies, and he was basically their agent for all of North America. And he ran those really as 3 discrete companies. And so when those companies grew to a certain size, I had, again, good fortune. They decided, hey, Lance, can you open our US office? So the first company, I moved to Philadelphia. A few years later, the next company grew. So I came back to Connecticut, opened their North American office. And that sort of led to a 30-year career dealing with mainly middle market, lower middle market, international businesses, either trying to establish or enhance or accelerate their growth in the Americas, plural. So.
That's awesome, fantastic. And so, Alliance Americas, you've sort of in the last say 6-12 months, really kind of evolved the concept, but you've been at this for many years, supporting these international expansions. Tell us about Alliance Americas and what you do and sort of the value that you bring to international companies.
So I sort of stumbled into it, and I definitely learned some lessons back in the early days of starting the first Swiss company's North American office. Basically at the time they said, Lance, go start an office. And so I really got thrown in the hot water and had to figure out how to do it. So at the same time, Lars, the Swedish gentleman's business at the time, I loved the concept, and I always had it in my mind for the last 30 years. So officially in 2007, I did form Alliance, but really focused only on merger and acquisition work. So those companies that were looking to grow accretively, maybe get a very quick launch into the Americas. But then about 1 year ago decided it's time for me really to focus full time on Alliance, and we're just in the process of securing space and hiring the staff and really doing everything from getting started all the way through the heart of the business, really running the operations for international, mainly advanced manufacturing companies, to the other side, which is the merger and acquisition work that we do, either buy side or sell side.
Fantastic. Cool. So let's dive into our topic. I think with that too, people will begin to kind of see a little bit more of your base of expertise and all that. So, and again, just to repeat for everybody, feel free to submit any questions. And so let's kind of deal with this topic from the sort of the big, sort of the big rocks here a little bit in terms of, when you think of the international companies coming in and you spend a ton of time, particularly with manufacturing, what are the major challenges that they face if you were going to sort of look at the major parts of that expansion? What are the things that are usually stand out as the biggest challenges?
So I spent a lot of time trying to categorize this. I have broken it down from my view into 6 major areas, 5 or 6 really. And today we're going to tackle the geographic distances. They all sort of interweave, but certainly the vast geographic size is probably the first thing that people have to think about, and how that plays into establishing an operation here. Certainly we are, comparatively speaking, we have a high cost of doing business. I try, at least for the manufacturing folks, to really help them understand that there has been, over the past 20 or even 30 years, a massive shift of manufacturing, high volume manufacturing, to low cost regions. So although we're still a really critical market, a lot of the high volume, people tend to be surprised that even though a lot of the decision making might be here, the volume production might not be here. So that has a big implication. We're, as a country, I think, business-wise, quite focused on new technology development. So that has some big challenges. And we're just, generally speaking, a very demanding customer base. And probably the last is these currency fluctuations. Ever since we really broke into independent currencies, shifting global supply chain with currency implications is a big factor that people should really think about as well.
Cool. Okay, well, let's maybe talk through these a little bit. So size, in terms of the geographic scale of the U.S. versus many countries. So when companies are coming in, so what are the things that you kind of work through in terms of overcoming the size? It seems like there are a variety of ways you could go there.
Yeah, so the size, it sometimes, I think, can be underestimated that the U.S. is, we all speak, for the most part, the same language, so it feels a little bit homogeneous and everywhere is fine. But I think with the size of the country, everyone knows that California has Silicon Valley and a tremendous market. And in fact, they do have, out of all the research and development spending in the US, about 2/3 is from 11 states. Of course, California is the biggest of those, but the 7 states here in the Northeast, or 7 of the states here in the Northeast, account actually for more. California is about $60 billion in R&D spending annually, and this cluster in the Northeast has about $75 billion. But that doesn't mean the middle of the country is barren wasteland. I mean, there's such, especially for key markets, really critical major players and influencers all throughout, not only the US, but North America.
So do you find sometimes it's better to go to a secondary or tertiary region on entry as opposed to going, whenever I go internationally, people think about the coast very much, and particularly Silicon Valley or Northern California. And so what how do you sort of weigh the options there? What are the variables that you look at to help a company make that first location decision?
So I think the first is probably to really understand the market you're serving. Obviously, if you're in the semiconductor manufacturing world, I'd probably have a tough time arguing that you should be located in Connecticut, but I can make that argument because ASML and others are there. But at the very least, you'd want to have a footprint in, if not the Bay Area, nearby. But other industries, we do have, I think, like many countries, we have clusters. So medical device might be, while we have lots here and in Boston and throughout New England, Minnesota, for instance, is a very critical area. People might not think of that first. And of course, with automotive, while it's not only Detroit anymore, as people think, there are still clearly clusters of manufacturing and innovation. So industry is probably the key. And within the industry, really thinking about who the major key accounts and influencers within that industry, where they're located. So the cost of doing business is probably, I hate to say it, is probably one of the last things I would look at. I would really try to understand the market and the target audience first.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a good segue to your second thing that you consider, which is the cost of doing business. So where does and how do you fit that into the formula in terms of the actual operational cost or the cost of entry?
Yeah, so I'm a little biased. I do love it here in Connecticut. I'm a New Englander, but of course I'm back and forth to California. I'm all over the country. And some businesses might be best off even locating in Canada or Mexico. But when I look at it, again, a little bit biased, there's a time zone for maybe for European clients. The opposite argument might be for California for Asian clients. So time difference is a factor. You want to have some overlap. It's not that critical, but I think it should be considered. And when I say I'm biased, I've worked a lot with Swiss and German and Dutch companies where they don't exactly have the lowest price in the marketplace, and Fairfield County might not be the cheapest place here in Connecticut to actually hire labor to manufacture. But somehow I've had a pretty decent career bringing Swiss or German or other products here, remanufacturing or adding value in a very expensive state and county, and still in many cases being number one in the market. So I don't want to discount the cost of doing business, but I think it could be really dangerous to locate just where costs might be low, upfront costs, meaning the building lease rates or hiring salary rates might be lower somewhere else. But if you're not close to your customers, you're going to spend it on airfare and everything else. So
right. Well, and maybe not have as deep a relationship as you might. So yeah, there's a balance. And I suppose the availability of skilled labor, all those types of things, really kind of critical, I would guess.
It's a major factor, and I think the U.S. in general struggles with that. We're trying to really retrain our workforce, especially in the advanced manufacturing area. But I think good people are available. I've never really had such a deep problem. I know people complain, but I definitely have been able to find good people or add the additional training when possible. That's maybe not the case everywhere, but certainly it's possible just about anywhere in the U.S.
Sure. Oh, that's great. And so the third sort of point you made was around new technology development, innovation, and so on. So can you talk us a little bit through that and why that's on the list and sort of one of the critical variables?
So I put this on mainly because of experience I had with certain companies where this idea that the U.S. is a $20 trillion GDP, and of course it's a market you must be in. I think that's for any moderate-sized, lower mid-market to mid-market, you really have to be here. But you should go in, I think, companies should go in with the expectation that is aligned with the market conditions. So in some cases, all of the engineering and getting on the approved vendor lists for these companies, like an Intel, for instance, And I had one German manufacturer that we managed that we worked day and night to get on the approved vendor list to be the preferred vendor for Intel. But maybe we sold 2 systems in Santa Clara and 2 systems in Phoenix. And then the purchase orders would come from the Philippines or China or wherever, where they were buying 20 or 30 machines at a time. So if a company doesn't get that, first of all, you're going to have really frustrated salespeople, but you have to really budget for it. I mean, you must be there on the technical side, so you might need a more technically competent engineering staff, sales engineers, applications engineers here in the US, whereas service and support might be more important where the production locations are physically.
That's fantastic. So yeah, but really looking at this very strategically in terms of where your customers' primary roles are, and aligning your team with those geographies sounds like it's really critical.
It even ties to let's say compensation models. So sales managers might be more motivated to be rewarded for design wins here in the US. Versus revenue, or even bookings. Or you can take a more global approach and really look at key accounts on a global basis and manage them really as a team. So there are alternatives to this. It's not really a problem. It's just something people must recognize, I believe.
Sure. Yeah. All good. And so when you say the U.S. customer base is highly demanding, or they're demanding, what I guess. Why is that important to consider, and is that an attribute of the competition, or sort of stiffer competition?
It's a great question. I believe it is related largely to competition, because this is the 20 trillion largest GDP. Everyone wants to be here, so everyone is here. So you have a massive competition. And I think it's everywhere, but I would say what I see, at least in Europe, is that it's mostly European competitors in certain markets. At least the Europeans are competing against each other. There's not that much competition sometimes from the Asian clients. And also with Asia, I think there's a lot of Southeast Asia clients fighting for the same market share. And maybe the Europeans aren't as strong in Asia, but the US has all. We have everyone. And so that definitely leads to it. And I think, if I can admit, Bill, that we're not perfect here. We are
a long way from it.
We like to be get it done people, but sometimes getting it done means getting it done quickly and moving too fast. So in a perfect world, you combine, again, not to pick on the Swiss or the Germans, but the business model there and the business culture tends to be much more process oriented, much more careful in engineering. And it works the best when those two worlds are merged together and we take the best of both. So the Americans maybe slow down a little and think about process a little bit more than we ordinarily would. But at the same time, we have to be quick because of the competition. So we're very demanding. We don't accept no for an answer. We want immediate turnaround. And not to go on too much of a monologue here, but to say that the time difference can actually be I found if you're clever about it, you can use it to a big advantage. So a client in California that has a problem, you can leave there at the end of the day, send the problem or call the problem over to your colleagues. And by the time that customer wakes up in the morning, he may have his answer. So it can really be actually an advantage, but you have to manage it the right way.
Sure. I suppose you have to set up the infrastructure to support that and manage it. Sure. So of all these, currency fluctuation seems like the one you really don't control at all, but only can somewhat manage. How do you navigate currency fluctuation or advise companies to do that?
So again, I'll admit weakness in that I've never really been very good at predicting the direction of currency trends. So I try, and I guess this would be my recommendation for anyone listening. If you can, you want to mitigate the risk of the fluctuations by centralizing, I think, the hedging that you might do. So if there's a parent company coming over, I would really say you should probably deal in the local currencies. So that office should be dealing in US dollars. And what I've done in the past is set up a bandwidth. You say, okay, within plus or minus 10%, let's say, on currency, the transfer pricing is established based on a certain fixed percentage. You review that, of course, and maybe you have some contracts with long-term contracts with customers that you can put currency clauses in, but it's best not to have multiple offices around the world. The CFOs or finance people there buying and selling dollars to try to hedge. I think it's best to centralize it. Maybe more importantly, though, is really to look at the full supply chain and say, even if you're not manufacturing here right away, you can definitely utilize America as to tie it into your global supply chain. So for one company, we were buying really advanced ceramics here that were shipped over to, in this case, Switzerland, integrated into the product. And when the final product came back, we did a duty drawback on any taxes that we paid on the products. And so you're buying a certain portion of your cost of goods in dollars, maybe another portion in euro or Swiss franc. So it can be a supply chain strategy as well.
Yeah. Well, hire a good finance person is maybe the answer. All right. So we've got a great question from Karina, and let's go to that. So the question is, can you talk a bit about the budget for opening an office in the U.S.? A lot of time companies think that they will just hire one rep here and that's all they need for their initial expenses. So what wisdom can you offer in terms of how to develop that initial budget?
Great question, Karina, I think it was. So I was that one guy at one point many years ago where, hey, Lance, go start the US office. And I survived, but I definitely don't recommend it for anyone. So if there's one thing from today's takeaway, whether you do business with Bill or me or any of our preferred partners, definitely get help, get expert help. And in terms of setting up a budget, absolutely. This is really the Alliance business model. We offer sort of a fractional share C-level team. But even if you don't work with that sort of unique business model, please, companies, if you're bringing someone over, you would like them to be focused on selling and growing the business, but it's very easy to underestimate all the many other things, including finance. The parent is going to want some sort of legitimate financial reporting, probably on a monthly basis. You've got legal and regulatory, human resource issues. So you really need to budget, I think, more broadly. And so, of course, the Alliance business model gives you the opportunity to have experienced fractional C-level management at a fraction of the cost. And so the salesperson and or customer service or engineer in certain cases can focus on what they're great at. But even if you don't go with our model, I would say definitely factor in a team. Of course, you have to put a budget together for the office itself, for getting launched, for even things like furniture and whatever basic equipment you might need. But definitely travel budgets are going to be very different than they would be, for instance, in Europe, because of the vast differences. And it's even deeper. The sales model tends to be different. So maybe we can touch on that a little, Bill, depending on time. But in terms of budgeting, it's hard to put a number. It depends case by case. But I would maybe, as a rule of thumb that I'm making up on the fly here, could be 4 times what you think the cost of a single person coming over would be in terms of staffing. You really need to have a broader staff, I think, to be most effective. That's maybe in addition to any upfront one-time capital expenses. But in terms of staffing, it might be something like 4x of a single person.
So, and continuing on with that a little bit, and maybe to your thought of talking about the sales model, the one question maybe to lead into that is, quite often I'll hear from companies and trade folks about sort of the idea that, companies quite often debate whether to hire a local US salesperson as that first employee or to move somebody over from the parent into the market, from whether it's the UK or from Germany or wherever. And so how do that obviously each one has sort of benefits and risks, and it seems like a real trade-off. How do you normally advise a company in that regard with having that sort of company experience or marketplace experience, which tends to be the most important for that first hire in the new market?
So they're definitely both important. I would say, individuals are different. So if you have an individual that is at the parent but has already great global international experience and is a person of the world and has traveled, then it might be okay to send them over, especially if they have the right skill set from an executive level. But the industry specific experience, I think most companies really focus on that, and I'm not so sure. I focus personally more on skill sets. If somebody's a great key account manager, I believe that they can learn a new industry, a new vertical. I prefer, so the answer of course is probably a compromise. Generally, I would prefer a North American, maybe an American lead for the operation, but I love having a mixture. So maybe there's a great applications engineer or a great sales engineer that can come from the parent company to the US, because that helps also not only with the knowledge of the parent company, but it helps also with the cultural differences to help align the differences that are just simply inherent in both on the business culture as well as just socially, the cultures are different. So it helps to have a mixture. The lead is probably best to be a local, but that's not always the case.
Sure.
If somebody's very international, that's fine.
Right. Yeah, I would imagine the cultural fit and having at least some human link to the home office is got to be really important. So to your sort of point about the sales process being different in the U.S. versus many other countries, what are some of the differences that you've seen, and how do companies navigate that?
So the geographic size again has many implications that have to be considered, but I think that the sales channel is one of the biggest. So and most companies have some experience here. They've worked either with distributors or reps. But we have a structure that's it's quite mature, and at the surface seems sometimes crazy. Well, we're going to pay these independent reps commission on our dollars, so that's a lot of money. Why don't we just hire more direct people? And I think at a certain size, and I'm not sure what the right number is, but you have to be pretty large to be able to hire a direct sales force to adequately cover the entire North American market. So even large companies, even the Tycos of the world, they work through manufacturers representatives. So manufacturers representatives might have 10 to 20 manufacturers lines on their line card, and they have a defined geographic territory that they work in, and they get paid really on commission. So they do a lot of work if they're good and you manage them or work with them, but they get paid on their success. So it's a really good model. And the layer below that or above that, however, if I'm a distributor, I'll say above that, is the distribution model. So the big, maybe names like Mauser and DigiKey and Newark or Element 14, Allied, Sager, these are great names, and they're so good at fulfilling either on the MRO, the maintenance and repair side, or on the early design win side, a new product introduction, that you have another built-in massive sales channel. Yes, they take some margin, but you really have to look at your specific market and say, well, is it better to give up on margin for fulfilling 1 and 2 piece orders, if I can get great access to new product introductions at key accounts that would take me thousands of dollars to reach by airplane and scheduling. So this distribution model layered with manufacturers' representatives, and maybe in some cases even value-added dealers, is a pretty complex matrix, but I have actually, after 30 years of defending the model, I actually have come to believe it's the best model for the size country we are geographically. But it's a big consideration for international companies coming here.
Yeah, sure. Well, and I imagine too is not just the access through those networks, but the time that prospects are in the sales funnel. The sales cycle is probably considerably shorter when you're leveraging existing relationships, and essentially it's an upsell for a lot of these, or a cross sell for a lot of these distributors and manufacturers reps. Yeah.
And on the distribution side, so you have with the manufacturers reps, of course, opportunity to cross sell if you're selling widget A and they're also selling widget B and the customer needs both. That's great. It's a good opportunity. But on the distribution side, it's a really fantastic opportunity. 400 lines, 600 lines. And so that engineer, even if you've got a great relationship with, to pick a name, a Siemens, you may have a new engineer that's working from home at 2 o'clock in the morning and wants to buy a part online and finds it online if you've got great e-commerce capabilities on your website or through the distributor. So you've got a design win that maybe no one even called on that person. They did the homework themselves, found the right product and purchased it. So now your distribution channel is bringing you a key account lead that you might not otherwise have had.
Cool. So 2 other quick questions on this topic, and then there's so many really good questions that we want to make sure we hit as well. So what are the criteria you would use to select a good either manufacturer's rep or distribution company? What are the kind of the key things that you would evaluate?
That's great. Good question, because I've developed over the years a ranking system, almost like a report card for the reps.
How did I know you had done that?
So not necessarily to punish them or reward them, but just to make sure that expectations are managed. And so I won't remember all 10 of them, but certainly technical competence. I'm assuming from my world, it's advanced manufacturing, electronics components. So technical competence is always an issue, familiarity with the products. In the case for the last company I was working with, we were going from component into system or subsystem. So the ability to scale, some representatives might be really component oriented in their mindset, while a system sale might be much more complex. I do like to look at the firm's, their operation itself to see what sort of infrastructure they have. They have really good internal technology and staff and customer service. I would say those are probably the most important, but the soft factors as well of, are they easy to work with, and do we have a good relationship, not just me personally, but your sales team or the factory, and do they really get what it is working with an international parent company. And so it works pretty well. You have to manage it and measure expectations, but there are, and I could actually share that. I think I have, I have a system to actually measure that on typically a quarterly basis.
Cool. Yeah, folks are interested in that. Just put a note in the chat and we can put it in the follow-up email. Thank you, Lance. So, here's a curious question, and this I may have a short follow-up to, but is how important is time to getting sales traction to market entry companies?
So have to think about that question and think maybe about what the proper starting point is for an own operation. And that number for me has shifted over the years, partly due to also the shift of high volume manufacturing. But I think the best case is if there is some existing business here, maybe again, I'm not picking on Siemens, but it's a global company with a wonderful infrastructure here in the US. And so if there are good relationships, for instance, in Germany or elsewhere, and there is residual business from those efforts in the home country, then you have something to build on. And some companies will work through distribution first. So if you have some traction here, it can help. But to get to the real question, I think you definitely either have to get the traction early, or you have to accept that you must be here. So put a budget together that says it may be a 12 or 18 month gestation period for the first orders and design wins to come to revenue recognition. So budget for that. Make sure that your team isn't getting beat on the head from day one. Make sure that it's realistic. Yeah. It's easier if you have some traction already and you can build on it. But it comes back to what is the run rate in terms of OpEx, operating expense. So if you have a certain number, you can pretty easily say what sort of revenue and profitability you need to be at to
sure.
a reasonable operation.
Yeah, that to me, that time is always sort of the thing that's least talked about, and I almost envision it like an hourglass with the sand sort of dropping out, and and as time goes by, you start losing, without some traction or success or signs of it, and without those wins, you start losing team members who find you sort of what they think are better opportunities. You start losing investment interest. You start, it's almost like leprosy. The parts start falling off, and it's sort of, rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic a bit. But
if you do it the right way, and I think the right way is a combination. You can set up the independent rep network, which somebody can do even in advance of launching the operation. But you could also do the market research and really identify who the major players and key account targets are, or your target audience in general. And so if you have those layers, and if you thought about it in advance, those discussions don't have to start on day one. You can actually plan ahead and get some traction, so that maybe even first orders and promises that you will have the team in place to support those orders. But time is an issue, and I think it's best to be realistic about it. It won't happen overnight in most cases.
Sure. Amazing how long an overnight success takes.
Yes.
So let's get to some more audience questions. So so there are a couple questions around regulations. So the first is the difference in regulations between the different states. Are there, from a manufacturing standpoint, do you find significant regulation differences that companies need to accommodate?
So regulation is a broad term. If I think about it in terms of, let's say, OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health. So there's a national level, but we have also Connecticut OSHA. And so there are differences, and we definitely have to look at those. Some things are more nationalized in terms of import-export compliance. It shouldn't matter so much, at least within the US, whether you're bringing a product in California or in New York. But in terms of importation and the export compliance rules, which are really important, by the way, for everyone listening, to really understand export compliance. Even if you're just shipping back to the parent, you have to really understand that aspect. So those are national. State by state, there are really critical differences on the taxation, which is maybe in the financial realm, but I'll call it regulation, and say that different income tax levels, different property tax, payroll, workers' comp. So it's really a pretty complex area. and even how one state might view if you're doing business in another state, whether they consider it taxable or not. So taxation's a key area. In terms of quality standards, that we're thankfully getting better and better in terms of ISO standards in Europe, or let's say CCC standards in China, that's getting closer together. So an SAE standard here in the US should tie to an ISO standard more and more. And those are pretty national, but there could be individual states work with radiation, for instance, for the X-ray world. And each state will have also in addition to the federal level, they'll have their own state requirements to be cognizant of.
Sure. That's excellent. And so I'm just, so let's see, navigating complex and overlapping regulatory organizations. So is this, obviously, you mentioned tax, which is a whole sort of separate regulatory discipline, and even the variety of specialists you might talk to in the various areas of tax. So is this something where an international company is best off to, it's one thing if you're going to get, just one advisor is regulatory advice, maybe the minimum that you need, but what are your thoughts in terms of coming in and getting professional help in that area?
So again, definitely seek professional guidance before you dive in here. Of course, I worked 30 years on the alliance model, so I'm pretty convinced it's one area where if you want to seek advice from sales strategy all the way through M&A and everything in between, meaning operational, regulatory, financial, it's hard to find it in one place. So we're proud to be able to do that. But assuming that not everybody's going to be an alliance client, I would say definitely the legal and financial are pretty critical. And the regulatory, again, I brought up export compliance because it was a blind spot for me for some years. The laws changed pretty dramatically a few years back and got incredibly stringent. So the penalties are mind-boggling. It's like $1 million penalty per occurrence. Oof. So importation's not as bad, but on export compliance, definitely look into it, have a policy in place really from day one. To really understand that. And by the way, I have to be careful because I talk mainly about the US and America, but of course, NAFTA right now, the North American Free Trade Agreement's in limbo. So we're really talking about a lot of question marks still between trade flow between Canada and Mexico. And I think we might have some South American clients on the call or prospects. So the import-export country by country is really critical as well. Just as an example.
Yeah, I would imagine thinking about $1 million fine, you got to sell a lot of widgets to make up for $1 million fine, for sure.
There's actually this is maybe important too. So on the financial side and on the regulatory side, there could be, so if you don't pay payroll taxes or you if you have an export compliance issue, especially if it's an ITAR, a military related issue, somebody could go to jail. So take it very seriously. If you hire someone here that's going to be your American representative, don't think that they're just crying that the sky is falling. They really understand there are personal, for being an officer of the company, there's personal risk and liability as well to look out for. Well,
that's on that cheery subject. Let's move on to another one. So, oh no, it's all good. So this question gets us back to the big geography or the geography question, which kind of is where we started. And that is, what does a company do to understand the relative strengths and weaknesses of different regions or clusters? It seems like first it's obviously establish sort of your goals and who you need to surround yourself with, that having that sort of as the true north. But where do they go once they've established sort of who the prototype customer is or that persona that they're aiming at?
That's great. Again, I think that's probably one of the most important is to really understand the market. So I'm assuming that if you're looking toward expansion to the Americas, that you have success, so you know who your key customers are, and they probably have U.S. operations. So that's probably a first starting point to think about. But there's so much market research now available. Some of it's expensive, but you can find a lot of free information to really do the market research and look at where the landscape is. Even on my website, for instance, we work with Dun & Bradstreet. We've got the Hoover's numbers. So just to have a glimpse at semiconductor or renewable energy, where the main players are, it's pretty easily accessible, at least for the key accounts. You can see, in a way, it doesn't matter on the distribution side, because like a DigiKey is in Thief River Falls, and they have one location, a massive facility that ships everywhere in the world. But on the key account side, you really want to look at these industry clusters. And I think you'll find them. I think if you really look at your own key accounts in your home markets, and where their parent companies are located, that might be a good indicator first. And then market research, and of course, working with firms like Meet, going to trade shows and maximizing your trade show presence is absolutely a great idea, to not just visit a trade show, but to really think about, if we're going to spend the money on going there, we want to maximize our time, maximize our visibility, and understand the market. So of course, exhibitions can be a good opportunity as well.
Got it. Cool. So and the various governments also have incredible data, that whether it's the U.S. government or the various states have incredible data about industry clusters and whatnot. Do you find yourself using and leveraging those resources often?
It's great. And mention the website again. There's a link on my website for helpful links or resources. It's under the resources tab, I think. And that's also years and years of collecting these reports, whether it's a KPMG manufacturing report or the government links, even interesting articles. So it's a resource that's available. But yes, I think that's a good point. I look at it, for instance, the UK, and even within the UK, you say the London's mayor's office has, for instance, great data. They've got so much knowledge on how to help companies either go in their direction to bring them to London, but to come here in this direction. There's great experience there, as you know, Bill. But those resources for consulates in your own country, they usually have people here residing in the country and in individual regions or states. So absolutely, it's a good point. Great resources.
Cool. And this next question actually is nice. It kind of pulls us into a new area. So, and I want to just as well, we've got about 10 minutes or so left. I would encourage folks, if you do have additional questions, please submit them. Just use the chat feature, and we'll keep hitting some of the ones that were sent in at registration. So, this is from an offshore manufacturer expanding to the U.S. What are the best tools to validate a manufacturer's capability until we build our own facility? So, how do they best assess a partner, a local or regional manufacturing partner who could help them get launched?
So I'm a convert in that years ago I said, oh, ISO 9000, and rolled my eyes a little bit in terms of, it's not really a measure of quality, but it's a measure of your management of your quality system. So whether it's ISO or TQM, Total Quality Management, I think it's really almost expected here in the US that you would have some basic, so you can look at you ask for their quality manual, and also, are they certified? Do they have ISO? And if they do have ISO certification, is it ISO 9001? Is it the latest? Is it 2015? And have they made that transition? If you're in a specific market, like a medical market, where medical certifications might be important, are they working within good manufacturing practices under FDA definitions? Are they, perhaps you need specific ISO certifications like 13485 for medical device world? So I think it's probably industry specific, but whatever supply chain management you're doing in your home market, you should probably have supplier quality audits already for your own manufacturing, and there's no reason you can't do a lot of that legwork up front, and to send supplier quality audits. And not only do they have controls, but their suppliers have controls, and are they in compliance not only with international standards but with things like equal opportunity employment and other U.S. regulatory issues.
The Department of Labor. All right.
Yes.
So the next question, actually really interesting, very current topic. So how would you advise a UK company to best present themselves to the US market in the face of Brexit?
Yes. So we should. I would advise for the two of us to get together and have a beer over
A warm beer.
Situations. Beyond that, maybe this is too cavalier, but I really try. I mean, the tariff situation for us and other issues in terms of the landscape at the moment, you can't ignore them, but I think it is best to plan your business no matter what. If you've got great technology and great customer service and great company corporate culture, I think you can manage through anything. But I would say that, of course, that factors into the decision whether or not to manufacture here and what your global supply chain looks like. Predicting where the pound is going to go, or even the euro, depending on Brexit, is almost impossible. I mean, the pundits will say they know, but no one knows. And so I would say factor that in, just factor it into the landscape in terms of, can you mitigate currency fluctuation risk with supply chain, or maybe setting up, if not full manufacturing, maybe assembly or final assembly in the US. So there are things you can do to mitigate. And so without joking too much, I mean, it's a factor, but we also have these challenges right now. If there are any Chinese customers listening, or companies listening, we don't know what's going to happen with the tariffs, and it's a very difficult, blunt instrument that we're dealing with right now. But I've kind of put my blinders on and said a good business is a good business. So, we'll work through it.
Cool. So I've one more new topic here, and that is related to visas and market entry from a personnel standpoint. So what are some of the current issues related to access to U.S. visas for entrepreneurs developing market-ready innovations?
Yeah, so it's a big topic, and I'm not an attorney, so I should be careful giving real advice in a very dynamic area right now. What I can say is historically H-1B visas are, few and far between. It's a long process, so plan for that if you go that direction. Work visas, become a little bit easier if you have a parent company with a U.S. office. That's usually the easiest to do, basically a work visa where you can bring someone over from that country. If it's a wholly owned subsidiary, that's pretty easy. But I have found if the parent company is in one country and you want to bring someone from yet another country over here, that becomes very complicated. So it's much easier if it's a direct line. I will say, it's also changing, but the EB-5, if anybody is really an entrepreneur that's had great success and wants to maybe invest, that's the most direct route to dealing with visas or citizenship. You can invest, I forget exactly what the numbers are. I know they're going up in November 2019, but it was, for instance, for certain areas of the country, $500,000 investment from an entrepreneur could essentially get you an EB-5 visa, essentially legal residence here. I think for regions that are not, it's higher. It was 1 million. I think it goes up to 1.8. I better check that, or someone should check it before. But there's specialists in EB5s that I can direct you to if that was an area of interest.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, and certainly, yeah, we'll follow up with an email, and certainly would encourage anyone to reach out to Lance directly with questions, or even let us know about resources that would be helpful for you. So we do have another online question that came in. Let's see. What, in your opinion, is the best state to invest in or establish a business for a German IT business, and why? And I would imagine there are a lot of details that you'd ask, but are there a top couple of states that are particularly strong for IT? And it may depend on what area of IT, but
it will definitely depend. So aside from the soft factors of time difference and things like that, I definitely think those areas that have the great university infrastructure. So obviously we're talking, not to be too coastally oriented here, but California, of course, has fantastic IT. Although I might say that you have to be careful because the price tag is going to be very high for people you're competing with, unicorns and others. But the Northeast in general, and you don't have to be in New York City, you don't have to be in Boston or even a big city, but the region has just phenomenal college educated university knowledge. And for IT, if you think about it, why wouldn't, if you're near Wall Street or you're near anywhere there's financial services, Connecticut has a huge insurance-based infrastructure. You might, customers might know that Infosys located recently, so major IT company that's in Hartford. I think, of course, it depends a bit on the industry and the specialty. Is it a SaaS business? Is it IT infrastructure? But the broader Northeast region, of course, including New York and West Coast, and I would say Chicago. You know, Chicago has an exchange. They have a great IT infrastructure there, and Texas would come to mind. I would say specifically Dallas, but Austin and other areas around the country. It's a little hard to, I don't want to pick favorites, but university-oriented areas, yeah.
Fantastic. So one last question, and then we'll wrap up. So here's an interesting one. So this is from somebody I'm assuming is from a trade organization, and so their question is, how do they help build a robust program to help companies soft land in the U.S.? So, what are the kind of the core things that it sounds like a non-U.S. agency might do to best support companies with U.S. market entry?
Great question. So I tried, and that's why it took me so long to start a company that could maybe address the broad range of concerns. So it's a big challenge to do it all in one operation. But I thought I had to because no one was doing it. And it's a massive need in this marketplace. So good for me, I guess. But Bill knows that we met. Actually, I met your wife a year or so ago. And what Meet is doing is fantastic. And so to pat you on the back, Bill, I mean, you're really championing this sort of soft landing preferred partner network. And we're really building a group of preferred partners that specialize or at least have individual expertise in doing these sorts of soft landings. I believe that we're on the way to really building something that can be a center point for international consulates and customers themselves to really contact. Again, if it's not Bill or Lance individually or our companies, we'll have a whole network, especially for individual expertise. So I think that's what, on our side, what we need to do. But certainly, I know that your individual consulate people and biz dev people are going to events here, World Affairs Council and elsewhere, where they're really ingrained in the local communities. So of course, they are great resources. You know, I mentioned London, but Bavaria, for instance, has a great presence here, and Bill knows them better than I do. But I think you've got resources in your own country that are resident here, but our early stages of this soft landing preferred partner network is, I think, a really good step for us as well to have a resource.
Yeah, and maybe one thing, and just to get your comment on, is, you know, it seems like there's a great opportunity. It's certainly I've met so many great trade folks in various consulates and embassies and so on. And that idea of, and I'd love your comment on this, the idea of doing some kind of market entry assessment and to, because it seems like a big part of the early process is sort of are you ready for this, and you know certainly you can go on the trade mission and the delegation and all those kinds of things, and that's all exciting and wonderful, but it seems like there's a lot that can be done before you leave the home market to test both everything from the company's readiness to the management team's readiness to go to a new market. So do you want to just make a comment or two on that? It just seems like that's an interesting opportunity.
It's a great question. I hope the listeners know that this wasn't seeded, because I don't even think I told you this, Bill, but I have really a pretty detailed questionnaire that I'll warn people up front. It's pretty daunting because it does explore every area, you know, regulatory and financial. But I think you're right. It's important to do that ahead of time. Really know where you are. It's almost like a readiness scorecard, which ultimately I'd like to convert it into, you know, really have a FAQ or online readiness. So I'll probably get there, but at the moment I have a separate document that I have used. I've abbreviated it in some cases so I don't make it too daunting for people. But if you want the full picture, I think I have something that maybe I could share. Yeah. Maybe I can even put it on the website.
Cool. Yeah, and certainly if folks are interested in that, either put it in the text chat or just email us in response when we send out the recording of the webinar and so on. So with that, we're just 2 minutes over the hour, and you know, we all turn into Cinderella and have to move on to other things in our day. So Lance, it's been phenomenal. This is great information. I've been getting emails and chat notes from folks who have really enjoyed this information. I'm sure we'll get additional feedback, but thank you for taking the time to share your wisdom. It was great. Any final sort of words to close us up?
Just to say, of course, it's my honor to do this. It's my passion to help create jobs, and especially in the advanced manufacturing area. I think it's a wonderful place to be. I think in a way it's important to be here, but this idea of growing businesses in North America and working together to find the best way to do that, I think if you're careful, my best advice is to make sure that you get the advice up front, do the homework up front. If you have questions for me, please, if you forward them to Bill, that's great. I'll do my best to respond to them over the weekend. And again, thank you, everyone. I can't hear you, but I really appreciate everybody taking the time to listen to me for an hour. It's really thankful. And Bill, thank you.
Absolutely. So just to mention our next webinar, it's going to be Tuesday, October 8th, and the topic is Taming the Marketing Funnel and How to Integrate Your Marketing. So it won't be nearly as exciting as this, but we'll do our best. Lance, thank you. Everybody, have a wonderful rest of the day. You'll see a follow-up email from us with the recording within the next 24 hours. Lance will be copied in, so feel free to dialogue with him directly or through us, whatever is best for you. So thank you, Lance. We'll talk to you soon, and thanks, everybody. Bye now.